Resume recording. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is our fourth and final panel today, talking about professional sociology. Again, this is the Culture and Contemporary Life Talk series. Today we have with us Dan Morris, Arlie Hostchild, and Pawan Ningra to talk about their areas of professional sociology. In the Culture and Contemporary Life Talk series is part of the culture section of the American Sociological Association. And I'll go ahead and pass this off to our moderator today, Anna Lopez Roy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you to the panelists for being here. And our topic for today is public sociology, the sociologist's role in the public sphere. And we have three excellent panelists. I will introduce them, and then we will start with three questions, and we will go around. So first we have Dr. Pavan Dhingra from Amherst College. He is former curator and senior advisor to the Smithsonian Institution's Beyond Hollywood project. His most recent book, Hypereducation: Why Good Schools, Good Grades, and Good Behavior Are Not Enough, was featured in the Netflix documentary Spelling the Dream. In addition, he has been featured in numerous media and academic outlets, including the National Public Radio, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and The Guardian. Next, we have Dr. Arlie Hochschild from UC Berkeley. She's an emeritus from UC Berkeley, author of 10 books, a number of which focus on family and work. For example, The Second Shift, The Time Bind, The Managed Heart. And then more recently, her work has turned to politics. Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right was a National Book Award finalist and a New York Times bestseller, and Stolen Pride, Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right was selected by Barack Obama as one of his 10 favorite books of 2024. Finally, we have Dr. Dan Morrison from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's a sociologist of science, technology, and medicine with a broad range of interests. He has written widely on topics such as empathy, care ethics, biomedical ethics, racism in medicine, interactionist social theory, and the sociology of ignorance. Dan is an associate professor of sociology and chair of the department, and he has been a co-host of the Annex Sociology podcast since 2021. Welcome all, and thank you for being here. And it is my great joy to start this panel with the first question, which is, how did you discover and subsequently become involved in public sociology in your own kind of experience? And we will start with Dr. Pavan Dhingra.
All right. First, I want to just thank Anna and Michael for arranging this. And it's great to be in conversation with Arlie and Dan and all of you on the Zoom screen. I think we're a smaller unit here, so hopefully we have some good conversation. My name is Pavan Dhingra. I am a professor at Amherst College and also do administrative work. So I'm all decked out for an administrative event, although I'm happy to be here as well. So I'll give you my kind of journey into this, and I think everyone's journey is a bit unique. So mine has very few lessons, I think, to be learned, but whatever you can glean from it would be great. So as was mentioned, I was a curator at the Smithsonian, which is I'll tell you the story behind that because that's what got me into public sociology. So I was a professor of sociology at Oberlin College in Ohio. I like to say it is minding my own business. And then I got emailed by some folks who were trying to put together a major exhibition at the Smithsonian on the history and current lives of Indian Americans, South Asian Americans. They wanted an academic to help lead this. The Smithsonian, even though it's a museum, is primarily a research-based institution. So they wanted an academic who could, knew a large part of the history, who could help develop, kind of a thoughtful narrative. And so I had no museum experience. I don't study art. I don't study museums. So there's no connection in that regard. But they knew that and they were fine with that. So that was about 10, 12 years ago. Oh God, time flies. 15 years ago now. when I moved to DC with my family from Ohio, and became a full-time curator. I took a leave from my college. I did not resign as a professor. Um, so that's one of the key ways in which I became a public sociologist. I'd written a book, and I think if any of you have published a book, you have this in your imagination that, once the book gets published, it's just going to get out there, and people are just going to find it. And you're just going to be answering questions about it, and hopefully, answering, complimentary questions. But either way, you're just waiting for that kind of response, and that's not how it works. And even, I'm not trying to embarrass Dr. Hochschild here, but it can be work for some of us, but for the majority of us, when you publish a book, you kind of have to then kind of drum up its own reception. So I say that to say, my first book came out and I was kind of waiting for these kind of, major kind of comments about it. Of course, I did fine. I'm very happy with it. But when you're at a place like the Smithsonian and you realize the reach that an exhibition can have, especially if it gets put up in one of its major museums, as opposed to kind of a temporary holding space, which is a whole different kind of question, you really do appreciate how the work we do in the academy really could and should be reaching a wider audience. There's so much potential for what we do that does not get tapped. So when I kind of experienced that, not as an idea, but you actually live it, you realize I really want the work that you do and publish to be getting out there. So then my second book had the fortunate kind of, and I can say more about this if you're interested in the Q&A, had the fortunate experience of being picked up by major news outlets and being interviewed for it and everything else. And then that led me to being interviewed for other kinds of topics around this. And then that got me to be thinking, wow, I enjoy being able to kind of give my 2 cents in a public venue. I find there's value to it, and I won't be, I'll admit that part of it is the public facing impact, part of it is ego. I'm not going to lie about that. But the point is that there's value that you find. And then that led me to start writing some op-eds, which I can see more about as well. I'm trying to keep this brief because this is how I got into the thing. And the last thing I'll mention, which was also mentioned in the introduction, is I was part of a Netflix documentary called Spelling the Dream. And that speaks to my most recent book that was published on youth and hypereducation. The book is called Hypereducation, on the educational commitments. And I say that to get the point that when you can find venues that you think are meaningful to get your research out there, I found it to be really compelling. There's 2 things I want to highlight in that sentence: the word valuable and research. Not all outlets are valuable. Okay. I turned down an opportunity to have one of my books turned into like a TV program for MTV because it was just going to be just a joke of a show. That wasn't valuable, right? I don't mean valuable in terms of my own kind of goals. Valuable in terms of, it would have not been a valuable product. It would have been a maligning product among the people I studied, in other words. So that was not valuable. And then the second word is research. We are in the business of producing research. And what I want us to get better is in the business of disseminating that research. And opinions, anyone can write an op-ed, and that's great. But the ones that I find most compelling, the ones that I'm sure all of us here find the most compelling and want to be connected to, are those that stem from research, that advance our research arguments. And that's what I found to be, those have been my personal own relationship to public sociology. I found it to become very fulfilling, and they can take multiple different venues, different avenues. But I guess I would ask each of us to ask ourselves, what do you find valuable and what can still stay research oriented or research forward? And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Dr. Hochschild.
Yes, thank you, Pawan. It's really interesting for us to compare our different experiences. I didn't set out to be a public sociologist, really, but I guess what happened to me is that in my second book, first was on aging. The second book is called The Second Shift, Working Families and the Revolution at Home. I started with doing qualitative interviews, and where you really get in deep, and that is a very valuable, enjoyable experience for me, still is. I love it. And so I wrote this book, and it caught on because this was the 80s, late 80s, and more women were going into full-time work, and they had preschool kids, and who was going to make a home, care for the children, and do the homework. And so, and my thesis was that women were pouring into the labor force in a stalled revolution. The culture hadn't shifted, men's notion of manhood hadn't altered, and it was a conflict zone. So, and how do you get an economy of gratitude going in those circumstances without changing the shape of the workplace? Anyway, and the gender identity. So that was kind of the problematic. I think what made it catch on was, first of all, the topic was something other people were facing in their personal lives, and that I wrote it in a jargon-free way. And I guess that's something that I would invite all sociologists to think about: how we write, to who do we imagine as our audience as we write. And I think that's a big deal, that writing clearly is not writing simply, and it's not writing without reference to everything you've read by other professional sociologists. That's all there in the end notes, but that when you write in a clear, jargon-free way. And I had no idea at this point that it would be reviewed by the New York Times very favorably. And I think things caught, then invitations came from that. But to a young sociologist, I guess I would say, don't write simply, don't dumb down your ideas, but write well, write clearly. And in the last two books, I've been quite, as I know we probably all are, distressed to see the rise of the right. And I've gone to southern Louisiana, and now most recently in Appalachia, to try and look at kind of the MAGA heartland, see what the thinking is. And interestingly, again, there's been a media following, and because people are anxious about it. So pick topics that worry you and worry other people, and write in a way that's invitational, not simple. I guess those would be my my thoughts, my takeaway.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison?
I want to start by just thanking you, Anna and Michael, for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel with some amazing co-panelists. So appreciate the work of both of my co-panelists and the organizers for this opportunity. I think I want to just start way back in like 2004 and 2005. I had just started graduate school at the University of Virginia, and I was in a seminar with Sharon Hayes, and I think it was a theory seminar, and Sharon said, I've been invited to contribute to this book on public sociology, and this guy named Michael Burawoy has
Yeah.
written this thing, and you all should read it and tell me what I should write. And so we read Michael's piece. I think it's called An Invitation to Public Sociology or something
Yeah.
similar. And we discussed it with Sharon, and Sharon, of course, wrote her piece that appeared in the 2007 book called Public Sociology, which has a longer subtitle that you can look up. But that's how I first became aware of this. We go to graduate school because we typically want to contribute to the discipline. Maybe we had a good experience in undergrad. We want to have live the life of a professor, that kind of thing. But that was my first introduction around 2004 or 2005. Fast forward, I got my first job in the Los Angeles area. And if you know Los Angeles, you know that's a car culture and you drive a lot, especially if you live far away from your workplace as I did. My workplace happened to be in Malibu, and I could not afford to live anywhere close to Malibu. So I was in the car a lot and listening to podcasts because I wanted to stay aware of what was going on in the world. And somehow I found, after I had left Malibu, found the NX and was a listener to that show early on. And the dynamic between Joe Cohen and Gabe Rossman and Leslie Hinkson was really interesting. They had a really nice relationship pre-existing that show, and they brought in really great guests to talk about what they were doing, but they also had fun banter segments and talking about the discipline of sociology. So this is early in the Annex's life. And then eventually, when I got a job at a smaller liberal arts college, in an out of the way place, I reached out to Joe and said, "Hey, I heard there's a new book by Michelle Jackson called Manifesto for a Dream, and you should have her on and talk about it." Because that's the kind of thing that the NX did or does. And Joe said, "That sounds like a great idea, Dan. Why don't you do that?" And I said to Joe, "I don't think that's what I was suggesting, Joe. But I'll try, but you have to do it with me." And so Joe said, "Well, you read the book and develop the questions, and I'll be, kind of your co-pilot for that interview." And then really it snowballed from there, Anna, to now over 60 episodes that I've either led solo or hosted solo, or done with a couple other people. It's led to collaborations with my undergraduate students and guests, in a couple of instances. And then we also interviewed the Steakums guy, which was fun. If you remember the era of Twitter and Steakums, you know what I'm talking about. But look in the archive on the nxpodcast.com and you can look that up. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, all three. Now we can move on to our next question, which is, what are some things people should be aware of, conscientious about, and cautious when moving into sociology that is of the public forum? And we can start with Dr. Dingra again.
So this is a really important question. Before I get to, I want to kind of echo something that Arlie said, which I had kind of come to understand when I was writing books and that were getting attention and what surprised me was that when a book got attention, it was like the topic, and what I think Arlie said, like the topic has to be matter to you and to others, or exactly how you phrased it. And what I want to highlight is that, in my experience and what I've heard from others as well, is that the actual argument you're making can actually matter less, at least at the beginning, in terms of why something gets picked up or not.
Right.
So what, I'm saying about so one of my books on the number of Indian American motel owners, right? No one cared at first. It wasn't picked up because of my argument about the motel owners. It was just the fact that it was like the topic itself became interesting. Right. Now, of course, when you're in the conversation and the interview or whatever else, you're kind of making. So my point is just kind of echo what Arlie said, which is, and I've heard a book agent refer to this, that we like big ideas. Now, what that means, it's very subjective and, we can try to unpack it. But the point is that the topic itself, right? How you write it, jargon free, all that stuff. But you can't take a topic that, it's hard to take a topic that does not resonate and have it click in the public media because you wrote it jargon free. I mean, that's great. And I'm not, and there's probably many examples we could point to and prove me wrong in 5 seconds. This was great. But if you just want to say about this, the topic itself matters not just your argument. And that just took me a little while to realize. No one cares that I'm writing about neoliberalism. And they just want to know about the actual kind of, the cover. Okay,
Yeah.
one thing I want to highlight. Then again, back to the actual question here. This is actually a really difficult question and a really important question. So one of the ways of thinking about what you should be aware of is in terms of your own kind of, assuming that we're all in the academy and we're all at least the kind of most ideal type of that is you're a tenured line professor. I don't know if I don't assume that among everyone here, but take that as an example. You might be wondering, well, will public sociology help me get tenure? Okay. And that really is an institution to institution specific question. I do think the ASA can be helpful in this, in being more articulate around how external reviewers and tenure committees in universities can be thinking about public sociology as a form of scholarship. And that when you start going down that road, you have to really unpack what you mean by public scholarship. Even in this conversation just now, we've heard about podcasts, major books, exhibitions. So one of the challenges in this is the idea of peer review, right? So what we do in terms of our tenure packet is demonstrate to our colleagues and to the external evaluators that we have accomplished a significant amount of peer-reviewed material. Okay, so what does it mean for how do you translate that question of peer review to public sociology? I think the ASA can be helpful in that. And I don't think there's a one size fits all there. I'm trying to say there's multiple kinds of public sociology, and they may not all count in the same way. Maybe probably shouldn't all count in the same way. Okay, that's one thing I want to kind of highlight. The last thing I want to say about this, at least for now, is what you should keep in mind, not for your own kind of personal career growth, which is what I just talked about, but your external situation as you engage in more public sociology, right? I mean, we are seeing, this sounds like some kind of dystopian science fiction, but it's not. It's actually reality that people are being kidnapped off the streets for co-authoring an op-ed in a student newspaper. That's real. That means when you engage in public sociology, you are taking different kinds of risks than you were 6 months ago. And you have to ask yourself, is this worth the risk? Now, it's hard to answer that because we don't know what the risk actually is. It's a hypothetical, okay? And you don't know how valuable this public sociology will be to you until it's probably already out there. So there's no easy answer to this. There's not going to be a pros and cons checklist you can ask yourself, but I'm just trying to highlight something. 80%, more or less, of the op-eds published are written by white men, or written by men. Okay, most of them are written by white. So I'm going to say 75% white men. If you don't fit into that category and you're making challenging arguments in a sphere that's understood to be a white male sphere, you're going to stick out all the more. You have to, and this is a current moment where that risk is extreme. And so I'm just trying to be very upfront. The public sociology, we can cheer it, and I promote it, but we're not in the same place we might have been when Boroway was writing about this, back in the day, right? We're not. And so I'm not trying to obviously scare anyone, and you all know the current realities as well or better than I do. So nothing I'm saying is new. But I do want us to recognize that when you enter a certain public space, especially one where someone like yourself is not normative, you can create more attention, draw more attention than you otherwise would. And right now, what that could mean is very, very serious. So I'm not suggesting you don't do it. I'm suggesting if you're going to do it, you plan ahead. Right? You think about what the implications can be. You've talked with your administration in advance. You've done things like, for instance, you can pay for services that will delete your public information off the web, right? I'll be forefront here and say I've paid for this service from a company called Delete Me. I'm not I don't know much about them. I'm not saying they're the good or bad one. I'm just telling you the one I use. All right. So this is the kind of thing to be more aware of, and I'll stop there. I'm not trying to end on a sad, cautious note, but I just want to emphasize that and the severity in which we're living in.
Thank you, Dr. Hushhill.
Yes, Pawan, thank you for that. It's scary what you just said, and very, very important, I think. And very salient for people like us. So, what, because we are in a very, I think, a frightening moment. And in my last book, Stolen Pride, based in Kentucky 5, which is the whitest and second poorest congressional district, and 80% went for Donald Trump. So I'm there trying to look, you guys used to be New Deal Democrats. What's happened? And the people I have interviewed, some were independents, non-voters, but some are God sent us Trump people. And what's happened with regard to the publicity of the book is strange. It's a little bit of good news story. Scott Tong came down with me and did 5 different, he's with PBS, no, NPR, sorry, and interviewed the people in a week that I had spent about 7 years getting to know. And people loved it. People have felt off the radar and unseen. So the people I've interviewed loved all this attention, and they kind of took in Scott, and there's another guy who he came to me and said, hey, would you like to sign something? I want to do a film on your book. And I didn't think it looked very probable with this guy. He was, anyway, but he was nice. And I thought, they'll welcome the attention. And so they kind of bonded with each person that sent. And now, actually, they are planning a dinner, all the people in the book together. And it's being organized by the God Sent Me Donald Trump guy. So I'm losing a little bit of control over this, okay, so what's scary and what could happen? What's a Japanese news service said, well, we don't want to really talk to you. We like to talk to the people that you interviewed. I think it's a right-wing service. And I did give him contact information with a guy who's very important in the book and who is the initiator of the East Kentucky Patriots and is very full steam ahead for Donald Trump. Small business person, feels bypassed. Anyway, so am I helping the right wing? Yeah, I could be. And that's totally what I don't want. And I guess what I would circle back to is just last minute, Pawan's remark that to speak out with our findings and our truth may be getting riskier. And I'm actually, I think we are in power of a kind of a cult. And if you seem to go against it, you will be on a list. So it's sobering, but I think our job is to not shy away from that danger. And there.
Dr. Morrison.
Well, my two co-panelists have done amazing work in their answer to this question. On the issue of risk or danger, I think the points are well taken about how different people are situated in structures of power, right? Intersectional systems of power and privilege. And so certainly those of us who are in members of groups that are more dominant than others often have a certain amount of privilege and leeway in what we're able to get away with in some sense. I will say that around October of last year, I started putting a disclaimer in the podcast at the very top of each episode. And that's for a couple reasons. One is SB 129 in Alabama, which is one of those divisive concepts laws. And secondly, there's an institutional neutrality policy for the state university system in Alabama. And I'd invite people to read it for themselves, but there's some language in there that's troubling to me as a sociologist, as a faculty member, and also as a department chair when it comes to statements about administrators in particular and these limits that you could infer or you could certainly see in those policies, particularly the institutional neutrality one. So all that said, let me address other parts of the question as far as credit or as far as connections to tenure and things like that. As far as I can tell, no credit and no pay for for the podcast. Books. The thing that I have done with the annex is when I invite people on, I ask them to have their publisher send a copy of the book either digitally or paper, and I read the books. There have been only a couple of occasions where I didn't finish every single sentence in the book, which I take a bit of pride in actually, because it's often the case that other book podcasts, not necessarily in sociology, but in other fields, will say things like, after they've interviewed the author, they'll say things like, well, I look forward to reading your book. And I sort of think, well, why did we just have this conversation if you haven't fully engaged with the text? And so that's a pet peeve of mine. I think one of the biggest benefits of doing this kind of work is relationship building. I mean, the fact that I could reach out to people who I don't know personally and say, hey, you've written this book. I'd love to talk to you about it. I'd love to learn more. In our work as academics, especially if we have a research program with very clear, trajectory in there, it's easy for us to get a little bit of a tunnel vision or a narrowed vision about what's going on in the discipline. And for me, I was in a biographical portion of my life and a career portion of my life where scholarship was less important. Teaching was really important at this private liberal arts college. And so they really didn't care so much that I was doing the podcast necessarily, as long as I was doing a really good job in the classroom and administering my little piece of the program. Also, what's really important is an understanding family. So when you have times in your weekly schedule where you say, look, I got to read this book because I'm interviewing this person in like 3 days, and I need to be able to finish and write some coherent questions. And so that means when, if you have a child or children and they go do something, you hang out in the car and you're reading this book, or you find a quiet place somewhere. These are just practical kinds of things I'm talking about. But really, I mean, no credit, no pay, but relationships. And in this field, I feel like relationships are really, really important. And it makes your ASA go a lot better, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. It's great.
Thank you so much again to the three panelists, and we'll move on to our final question, which is, what is the value of public sociology? What have been some of the most rewarding things that you have come directly from your public work as a sociologist? And we'll start with Dr. Dingra.
I actually want to pick up on what Dan just said, which is the relationships. And I hadn't thought about it actually. And so when you said it, it really resonated. And I want to highlight that. And it's and the reason why I think I want to highlight it is because I honestly don't know. Okay, I don't assume, nor do I have, and I don't think that when I write something for, I mean, I had an op-ed published in the New York Times and elsewhere, and everywhere else. I don't think people are changing their opinions about like the world because they read 800 words by me, right? It's just not how it works, right? And I really do think, again, I'm not just saying this, I promise. I really do think like a book by Arlie could make a difference. That's a different kind of thing. So I want to highlight that. I want to applaud that sincerely. And the books we write, I think, are meaningful. I think they do kind of, people do learn from the books, and then the podcasts about them are educational and informative. So what I value about the what's meaningful to me about what I value about the public sociology is that I think it has to be personally meaningful. I'm trying to say, right? You have to have your own value you place on it, and not necessarily some kind of outcome that you're trying to see happen, because that I don't think is something we can count on. I mean, just all these anecdotes just now, you went to Kentucky, this whole thing, and now is your work being used, right, in ways you disagree with? Maybe so. You cannot control the impact. It may not have much of an impact. So the value has to be for you. And that's why I want to highlight what Dan said, is that one of the things I had not thought about this, but as you say, it really resonates with me, Dan, that the relationships you build in this process are themselves valuable to you. So I want to get that part across. And I think that it's and there is something to be said, however, having said all that, that when you know something you've done, other people are able to engage with. I'm not going to say learn from, because I don't know what goes on in people's heads, but they have engaged with it to some level, right? That feels meaningful to me. Okay. Again, for the first thing we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we put so much time and energy into our research. It takes a book could take 10 years of your life, plus all of like all the side effects of that over those 10 years. You want people to engage with it, right? I'd rather have more people engage with it and not like it than not engage with it at all. And so when you're able to have that, it feeds you. It feeds me. I should speak for myself personally. I guess you want to go on to the next thing. So my point is that I don't think you can rely, the value is what the impact it has. You cannot know that impact. You should not assume that impact. And as Arlie said, the impact may be actually opposite of what you intend sometimes.
Yeah.
It's the value you get from it, right? Which include relationships that Dan said. That what carries in the fact that you put all this time on something and you know what's out there. You know people are engaging. That to me is where I kind of get my strength from.
Great. I can really relate very personally first to what you're saying, Dan, and Pawan, what you're saying, and seconding. When I think of all the books I've done, what's been personally the most gratifying comes out of Strangers in Their Own Land, which was based on field work around Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I went back and forth for a lot of time, about 7 years. And, one time I brought my husband, who was working on his manuscript, and he stayed for 10 days, and came with my son one time, who's very busy in Greening, California, and nephew. So they kind of knew me as a person with family. And the thing that was most sweet for me is that a woman that I describe in the introduction to Strangers, she was a single mom with and she was very right-wing, loved Donald Trump, and her son, not at all. And so they loved each other, a really sweet relationship, and they were really different. And I went out to dinner with the mother. She said, well, you know, Bailey really is liberal and he's looking for a different kind of college. I said, why don't you come on up to visit us in Berkeley, California? Maybe Bailey would be interested in Berkeley. And she said, okay, we'll come. So they did. Huge suitcases they weren't used to, kind of a quicking travel. And so my husband and I took Bailey around, went to actually a big mega class by Bob Reich, which was focusing on why there are more lobbyists than there have been before. Anyway, so I'm with this super Trump loving mother, her son who's loving this lecture, and feeling wonderful. I just felt great. I'm in touch with them still. And Bailey didn't go to Berkeley, but he went to another Christian college actually in Texas. But the relationship is ongoing and sweet, and they are a model. Actually, I talk them up as a model for crossover. I'm all into empathy bridges and how can we reconnect the different sectors of our culture that are so awry at that division being exploited now. And they model it. And so it gives me great pleasure. Just one more thing. The mother would say, oh, I have my little revolver in my the glove compartment of my car. It makes me feel safe. And Bailey, her son, said, guns give me the willies. And yet they talk, they love each other. There is this thing, the Norwegians call it communities of difference, that we're not used to, can't do. And if the Democratic Party is going to broaden its base, it's got to get good at doing that. So it's both something I believe in and something that's been a source of enormous personal joy.
Dr. Morrison?
Well, I'll just second the deep sense of fulfillment that some of this work gives to me. I mean, my personal biography is I come from a pretty small town outside of the third largest city in Missouri, which is not a great designation, as far as places to come from. And finding sociology in college at the University of Missouri Columbia, a large public research flagship university, was an absolute revelation to me. I'm deeply committed to sociology as a intellectual project. And I mean, it's hard not to say love sociology at this point, but I guess I'll just, since I'm in my emotions at this point, I'll just say I literally love sociology, and doing the annex is a way, at least for me, to share some of that love and commitment to the kinds of inquiry that we're dedicated to: scientific inquiry, empirical inquiry, those sorts of things. So the value, at least for me in the annex, and it's an accessible forum. We've had that conversation in sociology about the paywall and Social Archive, and Phil Cohen's led that in some ways, and a great sociologist and advocate. For me, we try to pitch the podcast at a level that's intended to be broadly understandable. So the way we talk to our guests is that this is like a water cooler conversation with a colleague who's not in your field. Maybe they're a sociologist, but they don't know anything about what you do. And so you're just having a chat and trying to keep things as, jargon free and non-technical as possible. And then I guess my aspiration, I don't know if this is really happening and to what extent, like has been mentioned, we can measure these things, but trying to demonstrate the value of sociology as a form of inquiry, as a set of intellectual and conceptual tools that have real real cash value, to use a pragmatic kind of phrase, for understanding where American society is, in our case, in our parochial US sense, but also in situating the difficult challenges that people are facing in time and place, trying to explain those things in ways that are understandable and that hopefully will last longer than the 90 minutes or whatever an episode is. And I think, to the extent that we can make the case not sort of so directly necessarily, but kind of indirectly and by example, I think it can make maybe it can make a difference. I'm not optimistic about our current political climate and our funding climate, but people have been here before, and we've faced challenges, and there are groups that have been much more harmed by this society than people like me. And so to the extent that sociology can help illuminate those processes and make the case for a better future for people, we should try to do that, I think.
Yeah. Right, right. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the panelists for sharing these, your experiences and your reflections about your public sociology work. We have about 12 minutes for questions and answers. So this is the moment where we can invite our audience to either unmute themselves or write something in the chat.
Anna, can I say something? Can I start us off?
Of course. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. First of all, this is an incredible panel. Thank you for your time and your insights, particularly, considering this fraught time with challenges that, I've never seen in my life. And it's really interesting to hear what you have to say about that. My question, I guess my first question, is I have targeted towards what Arlie Hochschild said about her ethnographic work and her interviews concerning Appalachia and white America. You said something really resonant for me that that I think hit home in that you said, "Am I helping the right wing?" And my personal research has to do with Latino evangelicals, and so I often have those types of thoughts. I'd love to hear more about what you have to say about that. And then my second question has to do with what it means to practice public sociology, especially when our subjects are from marginalized communities, and how visibility may harm them, as well as highlight their challenges and their voices. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for your question, Andrea, and I'm glad to have a fellow ethnographer in this field. It is challenging. I think if we have to not worry, actually, I'm talking to myself here about giving aid to the enemy here, if we are conveying the real emotional, complex, conflicted truth of the people we're getting to know, and putting out our hypotheses as to what goes on. I think that's truth's our friend. And we can't be pragmatic and hide things that might be useful to the other side. I think that's a kind of a false fear. And yeah, so we should we should follow what they're telling us. And why does the other side have an appeal? Are we in a cult? Okay. Then what's the appeal of the cult? What's the rest of their reality look like? Why would a cult have appeal? What's daily life on the outside of that cult? We just got to go deeper and deeper and be fearless. It's not that we don't have fears, but that we work on those fears. That's the emotional labor of research, is kind of working on your anxieties and your fears and just going ahead. I think.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
The only thing I would add to your, especially to your second question, about can our work be used against those who are vulnerable, is to really be mindful. I mean, to best you can't predict things, you don't control things, you don't control outlets, but just picking and choosing which outlets you share what with, right? It's okay to decline opportunities to talk about your research if you don't think it'll be edited and produced in a way that will convey your message, right? It's okay to talk to a journalist in advance and say, well, before I want to agree to talk to you, tell me more about why you're writing this story, right? What do you hope to get at? What's your angle so far? Who else are you interviewing, right? Those are all fair questions, for example.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Any other thoughts about this question?
I guess I would just say there's some decent, I think there's some decent models. Abigail Andrews and colleagues, Banished Men, which we had on the podcast. Anna contributed to that project. We just did 2 episodes with Ernesto Castaneda, one with also with his co-author Daniel Jenks, that I thought did a great job of telling some really important stories about family reunification and even some undocumented folks that was sensitive to some of these issues. I think a lot of it also depends on sort of where you're storing your information and kind of how secure that might be. We have many examples in sociology where people do research that is subpoenaed, and otherwise authorities want to take a look inside your notes and things. So I think it's worth thinking about what form those notes take. And digital storage is sometimes good, but there may also be some downsides. And so just thinking through some of those issues as well.
Yeah, thank you so much to all 3 of you. I appreciate that. It's it feels like a looming challenge. So this has been very clarifying.
Are there any other questions?
And I have a question for all audience members. I think about doing podcasts, but also op-eds and figuring out, which commitments we want to make with the research that we're doing and with what we know and how to share it. Part of it is who our intended audience is, but then we also, after listening to all this, we also have to think about, I think, that is who our audience might be, our unintended audience, and how that information might also get into their hands. So I wonder, with that being said, how we balance between and when humor is acceptable and because it is an entertainment realm, some of these are, right, particularly podcasting can be based on who we think our listeners might be and what the topic is, as well as when you said MTV tried to get you to come into, and it was probably more entertaining than it was serious. So balancing between intellect and humor or entertainment, and how you go about doing that in the different venues that you perform in.
Yeah, just to add to what Michael's saying, that we almost in the public realm have 2 2 layers of conversation going on in the public realm. One layer is just a shame show. It's just insult here, insult there, back, forth. And the people that I came to know, who proud hillbillies, they'll say, about themselves, feel insulted by CNN. And I feel like I'm just kind of timidly making a kind of a nice bridge, hey, rule is no insults. We're going deeper than that. And we'll find things in common with that. And so part of what sociology, I think, can really offer, and why public sociology is so important, and I really appreciate the work that's going on right here in this panel, is to create that second channel, that empathy bridge, where I'm really interested in what happened to you. I'm interested in what sense you make of it. We don't agree, and going in, you're not promising to agree, and you don't expect that of them. But what you do offer and want back is empathy. Like, I get where you came from. And if I believed what you believed, okay, I'd agree with you. It's just I'm in a different truth. So and that's what's happened to us. We are siloed. So you're talking across silos. And I just had an event with a guy who I really had a bond with. And he, in the middle of the last interview, which I'm doing for an op-ed on how Kentucky 5 is responding to Trump's last 100 days. And he said, you people on the left, you're trying to make us out as fascists. And I thought, oh God, all of my work and my empathy bridge building is for naught. I didn't respond. I hope you've read my words. Don't work like that, think like that, talk like that. And the next day, he said, it was our day. I want to apologize. I want you to accept my apology. I'm really sorry I got cross with you. I said, of course, I accept, yeah. And I'm so grateful to be able to learn from you and talk to you. And he's very hard line, but it's his idea to get all the people in the book together for dinner next October. So don't give up on anybody. When you think it's an empathy rupture such as you'd hope would never happen, I think people catch on to what we're doing and can actually help and be wonderful. So important, and let's all keep doing it.
Thank you. I did see that there was one more question in the chat, so I want to make certain to recognize this one, and that is, I'm gonna run it. That is, it's been really cool. I'm not sure if this was discussed earlier, but given the current state of academia, do you think graduate students are safe to participate in public sociology?
Are grad students safe to participate in public sociology? I don't want to create too dire of an image of public sociology. I mean, I just wanted to highlight there are risks, okay?
Yeah.
So, and what we should not be naive to them. So I want to say yes. I mean, everyone should participate in public sociology. If I have, I want to get that across. I think the key question you'd have to ask is, well, again, what part? What am I doing in advance to be mindful of what could happen? How valuable is it to me? These are things we should be asking in all sorts of different spaces and different venues. We should have been asking this 10, 15 years ago in public sociology, even more so today. So my answer is yes. And just ask yourself some questions in advance and prepare in advance. I think that if you have, things published, I'll just take an example, that in major news outlets, and if you're a grad student, you're applying for a job as a professor, that can add to your portfolio, right? It shows that you're able to translate your ideas to venues and to people as I said before, in jargon-free ways and communicate effectively in multiple genres. That adds to your kind of portfolio. So it can be a strength, right? So just be mindful and plan accordingly. That's true for anybody.
Very useful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Dan apologized. He had to run to another meeting, but I think we're on time. So I just have to thank the panelists, the audience, and Michael, thank you so much as well for coordinating this.
And I'll just give closing to say again, this is the Culture and Contemporary Life Talk series. a part of the culture section of American Sociological Association. And this is our final episode for the 2024-2025 series. But please stay tuned because we have a whole set of episodes coming up next year with another set of great moderators and a great crew of committee members for that series. So thank you all. And Arlie, Pawan, and also Dan, thank you for being here today and talking about professional sociology. What a great way to end this the series for the year.
Great to meet you all, really.
Thank
Very
you for the-
big pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you.